What if the dinner you ate last night had almost nothing to do with the numbers staring back at you this morning? I'm Frank. I'm 83, and for a long time I put my dinner plate on trial every single morning. I'd lie there before even getting up, running through what I'd eaten the night before like a lawyer building a case against myself. Too much rice, that extra piece of bread, maybe the sauce had sugar in it. I was convinced, absolutely convinced, that if I could just find the culprit at dinner, I could finally win this fight. I never found it, because dinner was rarely the real defendant. I'm 83 now, and most mornings I wake up without that courtroom running in my head. I take my walk, I read my paper, I call my son most days, and I don't spend the first hour of my day picking apart what I ate 12 hours earlier. That peace didn't come easy, and it didn't come from finding the perfect dinner. It came from finally understanding where the number was actually coming from. Here's what that interrogation cost me, emotionally, for longer than I want to admit. Every morning became an audit. I'd second-guess a piece of fruit I ate 3 days earlier. I got suspicious of foods I used to enjoy without a second thought. Dinner, which used to be one of the few genuine pleasures left in my day, turned into something I approached like a minefield. And even then, even doing everything by the book, the number kept climbing overnight anyway. That's the part that broke something in me for a while. Not the number itself, the sense that I could do everything right and still be punished for it. I remember confessing this to my doctor once, half joking, saying I'd basically stopped eating dinner at all some nights out of pure frustration. She looked concerned, not amused, and that's when she said something that changed how I thought about this entirely. Frank, your dinner isn't the only thing setting that number. Your body does something on its own, every night, whether you eat or not. I didn't fully believe her at first. It sounded like an excuse, honestly, a way of letting dinner off the hook. But I looked into it, and what I found was one of those things that, once you understand it, you can't unsee. I want to tell you what it felt like to finally believe her, because it wasn't instant relief, it was almost grief first. Grief for all those years spent interrogating myself over a plate of food, when the real process was happening somewhere I couldn't see or control by watching what I ate more carefully. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting the wrong battle for years, thinking you're just not fighting hard enough, when the truth is you were never even fighting in the right place. I sat with that for a few days before the relief actually settled in. Research on aging and metabolism describes a process called the dawn phenomenon. Sometime between about 2 and 4 in the morning, your liver releases a burst of stored glucose into your bloodstream. This isn't a malfunction, it's a normal biological process meant to prime your body with fuel before you wake up, tied to a natural rise in hormones like cortisol and growth hormone that happens in those early hours regardless of what you ate. In a younger, more insulin-sensitive body, that release gets absorbed and cleared quietly, and you'd never even notice it happened. But after 60, especially with years of built-up insulin resistance, that release doesn't get cleared efficiently. It just sits there, accumulating, and shows up on your meter as a number that looks like a verdict on last night's dinner, when really, it's the tail end of something your liver did entirely on its own, hours after you'd already gone to sleep. Dinner still matters, don't misunderstand me. What you eat in the evening absolutely affects your blood sugar in the few hours right after eating. But dinner was never the whole story of what you see on the meter at dawn. The liver's overnight release is a separate process running on its own clock, largely indifferent to how carefully you ate the night before. And there's a specific detail about what actually influences how aggressive that overnight liver release becomes, something connected not to your dinner plate at all, but to a completely different part of your evening that I had never once considered until I went looking for it. And it's the piece that finally gave me something real to work with. You do everything right. You eat clean, you take your pills, and the next morning that number is still too high. I know that frustration. I lived it for years. They never tell you about the morning rise, your sugar climbing while you sleep, no matter what you did the day before. You wake up, you test, and it feels like the work didn't count, like you're stuck depending on more and getting nowhere. I was done feeling powerless. I didn't want to throw out my doctor's plan. I wanted something natural and simple I could add to it, something that finally moved that morning number. I'll walk you through what changed it for me, and the natural support I add every day is in the free presentation linked below. The detail is sleep quality. specifically how deep and uninterrupted your sleep is in those early morning hours when the liver does its work. Research connecting sleep and blood sugar regulation has found that fragmented, shallow sleep is associated with elevated cortisol overnight, and cortisol is one of the primary signals telling your liver to release stored glucose. Poor sleep doesn't just leave you tired. It appears to turn up the volume on the exact process responsible for your morning number. Once I understood that, I stopped trying to fix dinner and started paying attention to my evening in a completely different way. I began going to bed at the same time every night, no exceptions, because research on sleep consistency has associated irregular sleep schedules with poorer glucose control, independent of total hours slept. I kept my room cooler and darker than I used to, since a cooler, darker environment supports deeper, less fragmented sleep. And I stopped my last cup of coffee well before early afternoon, because caffeine late in the day was quietly undermining the depth of my sleep without me ever connecting the two. None of these are dramatic changes, none of them cost anything, but together they addressed something dinner never could have touched, because dinner was never the actual mechanism at fault. There's one more piece, and it surprised me the most. A short walk after dinner, just 10 minutes, pulls glucose out of your bloodstream through your muscles using a pathway called GLUT4, which works independently of insulin. That means even a body with sluggish insulin response can still clear some blood sugar through simple movement, leaving less for the liver's overnight surge to compound. It isn't about undoing dinner. It's about giving your body one more tool to handle what the liver does regardless. Sleep consistency, a cooler, darker room, earlier caffeine cutoff, a short walk after dinner. None of it targets your plate. All of it targets the actual overnight process your plate was never responsible for in the first place. I'll tell you honestly, the hardest of these for me was the sleep schedule, not the caffeine or the walk. I'd spent decades staying up reading until whatever hour I felt like, treating a fixed bedtime as something only children needed. Learning that my own inconsistency might be quietly feeding the exact number I was so frustrated by took some humility to accept. I started small, just going to bed within the same half-hour window every night, weekends included, no exceptions for a good book or a late show. It felt almost silly, giving that much weight to something so mundane. But mundane, repeated consistently, is exactly what seems to matter here. It's not one heroic night of good sleep. It's the boring sameness of it, night after night, that gives your body less reason to swing wildly in either direction. I want you to see what a morning looks like for me now, at 83, without that courtroom running in my head. I wake up, I stretch, I make a full breakfast without guilt hanging over it. And some mornings I drive myself to the hardware store for whatever small project I've got going that week. No interrogating last night's dinner, no dread before I even open my eyes, just an ordinary morning, which at my age I've learned not to take for granted. There was a woman at my physical therapy clinic, Eleanor, 81, who told me she'd kept a food diary for 6 years trying to find the dinner that was doing this to her. 6 years of writing down every bite, cross-referencing it against her morning numbers, and never finding a pattern that held. When I told her what I'd learned about the liver's own overnight process, she went quiet for a moment, and then admitted she felt almost angry, not at herself anymore, finally, but at how long she'd spent blaming the wrong thing. She started focusing on her sleep instead of her dinner diary, and told me a few weeks later it was the first time in years she felt like she was working on the actual problem instead of chasing a ghost. Eleanor told me something else that stuck with me. She said the food diary hadn't just cost her time, it had cost her the pleasure of eating altogether. Every bite had become data, evidence, something to be judged later. When she set the diary down and started paying attention to her sleep instead, she said dinner became a meal again instead of a courtroom exhibit. I understood that completely because I'd lived the same transformation myself, just with my own private version of the same trial. I think about how much energy people our age spend blaming ourselves for things that were never fully in our control to begin with. The morning number isn't a referendum on your character or your discipline at the dinner table. It's a process, mostly running on its own clock, that responds to a completely different set of levers than the ones we're usually told to pull. I'm not telling you dinner doesn't matter at all, and I'm certainly not telling you to change or stop any medication your doctor has you on. What I am telling you is that if you've spent years blaming your evening meal for a number that never seems to move, you might be interrogating the wrong suspect, and there are real, natural ways to address the actual mechanism, always alongside your doctor's care, never instead of it. If you watched this whole thing, you're not the type who gives up. You're the type who keeps looking for a real answer. So let me be straight with you. The morning number isn't your fault, and it isn't just diabetes. It's the dawn rise, and it responds to the right daily habits. The goal was never to quit your treatment. It was to support it naturally so you finally see that number move and feel in control again. Alongside the steps I showed you, I take a simple, natural support every day to help keep my blood sugar in a healthy range. Affordable, easy, and it works with my doctor's plan, not against it. The free presentation is in the description below. Go see it for yourself. And keep your doctor in the loop. This is support, not a replacement. If you've spent years like I did, putting your own dinner on trial every single morning, I want you to feel some relief today, even if it's mixed with frustration that nobody explained this sooner. Both feelings are fair. I felt them too. Drop your morning number in the comments below. I read every one, and I promise you, there are people your age carrying the exact same guilt over a dinner plate that was never really the culprit. Please talk with your doctor before changing anything about your routine. And if this helped you stop blaming yourself for something that was never fully in your hands, subscribe. There's more of what I've learned, and I want you to have.